Think of the horror of people dying violently, and the war in Syria, or a mass shooting may spring to mind. Events like the massacre in Las Vegas highlight the sometimes surprising reality that there are many more people suffering violent deaths in countries at peace than there are in war zones. Every violent death is a tragedy, but getting the numbers right matters. Reports of deaths in a war zone, a city suffering drug-related violence, or a country plagued by shootings, can drive how the world responds, from media coverage, to business investment, policy decisions and spending by governments and charities. The trouble is that coming up with accurate figures is extremely hard. Just one consequence is that although murders very probably kill far more people than wars, it is usually combat deaths that tend to get the most attention. Since the outbreak of war in Syria, the country has been devastated, global powers have been drawn in and huge numbers of people have died. By February 2016, after almost 5 years of fighting, the death toll from battle and other causes had reached 470,000, according to the Syrian Center for Policy Research. 2 months later, the UN Special Envoy came up with a lower figure of 400,000, far higher than the 250,000 the organization had estimated 18 months earlier, after which it stopped counting because it didn't trust the numbers it was getting. Another estimate came in March 2017, from the London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, considered one of the most credible sources, because of its use of on-the-ground reports. It suggested that the toll was closer to 320,000, still horrific, but 150,000 fewer deaths than the upper estimates. Those given the sad task of trying to count more deaths, are forced to rely upon a variety of flawed methods. In Yemen, for example, the United Nations used reports from hospitals to estimate 10,000 war deaths by January 2017. However, many hospitals have closed, and much of the fighting has taken place in rural areas that didn't have any to start with. Many of the dead are simply taken home by their families and buried. That could mean that 10,000 is a serious underestimate. On the other hand, since rural areas are sparsely populated, the UN figure may not be so far off after all. Elsewhere, some of the most meticulous researchers insist on being able to name a perpetrator before they count a death and use only English-language newspapers, to ensure consistency. This makes details of confirmed deaths robust, and international comparisons simple, but deaths and messy conflicts where perpetrators are hard to pinpoint, or those which don't get media attention, a problem in rural areas, or under authoritarian regimes that control the media, can be missed. There can also be a problem where much of the reporting is not in English. In Colombia, for example, where most coverage is in Spanish, researchers at the Conflict Analysis Resource Center in Bogotá estimated that international experts had captured fewer than half the deaths in most years of its guerrilla conflict.